What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we dive into the new mechanics that are coming along with the Phyrexia All-Will-Be-One set coming to MTG in the next couple weeks. I think in Arena will be here on the 7th. The pre-release stuff happens the weekend before, and I think the following Friday is when it hits store shelves, and then you can physically buy the product and legally play it in decks. So definitely kind of interesting, definitely an exciting point for the game. But in today's video, I wanted to kind of go over some of the new stuff that is coming with the set, not just the cards, but actually the mechanics that are behind the cards, as I would say this is definitely an interesting set when it comes to said mechanics that are being introduced. With that being said, let's just dive into the cards and let's just start talking about them. And the first mechanic up is going to be Toxic. As you see here, we have the Tyrannorex, the 7-mana 8/8 that can't be countered, trample, ward 4, haste, and has Toxic 4. Toxic is a new mechanic that is being introduced with Phyrexia All-Will-Be-One. It is a mechanic that whenever this creature does damage, if it deals damage to a player, it gets that many poison counters. And if you're not aware of what poison counters are another mechanic that have been introduced in Magic prior. And if you get to 10 poison counters, you actually lose the game. So even if this creature is a big 8/8, it's definitely a card that punishes your opponent's life total as well as their poison total. And in this set, we have a lot of cards that either, deal poison in one way or the other, whether it's Toxic 4, Toxic 6, Toxic 1. There are quite a few cards in this set that will put poison counters on your opponent. This is just an example of one that will put it up pretty quickly. And it's definitely kind of interesting to see poison kind of be introduced with these Phyrexian creatures. And there are some mechanics that kind of go alongside of, your opponent having certain amounts of poison counters on them, and that leads us to our next mechanic. And our next mechanic up is going to be Corrupted. So Corrupted is this other ability that kind of ties with poison counters, and as you see here, we have the Anointed with Affliction. It's a 2-mana instant speed removal spell that exiles target creature if it has mana value 3 or less. And then its Corrupted ability is the fact that if our opponent has 3 or more poison counters on them, we get to actually do this for the Corrupted side of things, and that allows us to exile that creature instead if its controller has 3 or more poison counters. So essentially, it turns the spell from being just a 2-mana exile anything 3 mana value or less creature removal to exile any creature for 2 mana, which is definitely kind of interesting. And this is just one example of how we have additional effects of cards. As you see here, we have the Seed Core. It's a land that has a corrupted ability. It's initially just a colorless mana source that also can be tapped for any mana of any color, and it's essentially a Phyrexian mana a source to help you fix your mana for Phyrexian style decks, as it allows us to play Phyrexian creatures with its second ability, and we get to make mana for any color to cast said creature spell. And then the corrupted ability of this land is that we can tap it, we get to target a 1/1 that we control, it gets +2/+1 to end a turn, and then like I said, it only gets activated if our opponent has 3 or more poison counters. So this is definitely one of those things that you could add into a deck that if you play a lot of smaller creatures that have toxic on them, later as they build up poison, you can then make those toxic creatures into a little bit more of a threat, making that maybe 1/1 with Toxic 1 into a 3/2 with Toxic 1, which is still putting pressure on their life total and also putting pressure on their overall their poison counter in that regard. And I just wanted to kind of show you another enchantment that has more of a static ability of it. This enchantment is at the beginning of our upkeep, we lose 1 life and create a 1/1 Phyrexian Bite creature token with Toxic 1, and the creature can't block. And as you see here, its corrupted ability is as long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters on it, creatures you control have Toxic, and with Toxic have lifelink, so it turns these little 1/1s into 1/1 Toxic lifelinkers. And on top of that, if you have any other creatures in your deck, now all of a sudden you have Toxic lifelinkers as well. This is definitely kind of an interesting thing. This one's more of another thing that passively happens as they go up in poison counter. So once they get that 3rd poison counter, they will then essentially now all have lifelink, making them much more effective and much more punishing to your opponent's life total. Now, the other thing is there's good and bad sides, I guess, to this story that is going on with Phyrexia All-Will-Be-One, and we have an ability for the heroes of the set, or heroes of the story, I would say, called for Mirrodin. It's a lot of what I've seen of it so far in the spoilers is on equipments, and essentially what it is a mechanic that when you cast this particular mechanic or cast this particular equipment, if it has the 4 Mirrodin ability, it enters the battlefield. This equipment enters the battlefield. We create a 2/2 rebel creature token, and then we get to attach this equipment to said creature, and then that equipped creature now has +2/+2 flying and haste. So it turns this card from just being a 5-mana equipment that gives target creature +2/+2 flying and haste into a 5-mana 4/4 flying haster, and then we can always move the equipment around if we need to for 5 mana. But it's definitely another interesting mechanic. There are other equipments I've seen that have the 4 Mirrodin ability This is another one, Blade of Shared Souls. It is a 3 mana equipment that whenever, it enters the battlefield with a 2/2 rebel creature token, but whenever it becomes attached to a creature for as long as it remains attached to that creature, you may have that creature become a copy of another target creature we control. So what this is a 3 mana, make a 2/2 that it can turn into any other creature we may control, so then we can get an additional copy of said creature, and then we can move that equipment around for 2 mana, which is pretty interesting. Overall, it doesn't get rid of the legendary effects, so you can't copy another legendary creature you control and have two of them, as it says that it's a copy of that creature, so you would still have to make the choice of which legendary permanent you would want to keep. But still, other cool mechanics kind of along with the heroes of the set to kind of show like you're getting ready for war essentially, and you're equipping your creatures with equipment to get ready for war, and you get a creature along with equipment, which is definitely pretty cool. Another interesting mechanic that we have being added in with the Phyrexia All-in-One set is oil counters, and this is an Urbrax Forge. You would assume artifacts, are machines. They may use oil to be machines, and in this one, it's at the beginning of our combat, we get to put an oil counter on it. Then we get to create an X1 red Phyrexian horror creature token with trample and haste, where X is the number of oil counters on the forge, and then at the beginning of our next upkeep, we at the sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step, so meaning the creature leaves the battlefield at end of turn. Which is definitely kind of another interesting thing. It's kind of starts off very small, but as it builds up oil counters, those creatures start going from 1/1s to 2/1s to 3/1s and so on and so forth, as until this literally leaves the battlefield or the game is over, which is definitely another interesting way to put pressure on your opponent's cards. And the other benefit here is that these counters can be targeted by other abilities that are being introduced in Phyrexia All-in-One, and that brings us to another mechanic that is returning, that has been around in MTG, and that is Proliferate. So as you see here, we have Experimental Augury. It's a 2 mana instant speed card that we get to look at the top 3 cards of our library. We get to put one of them into our hand, the rest on the bottom of our library in any random order, and then we get to proliferate, meaning that we can choose any number of permanents and or players and then give them each another counter of that kind they already there. So for example, if you have a card that has oil counters, you can proliferate to get an additional oil counter. If your creature has a +1/+1 counter, you get to give that creature an additional +1/+1 counter. If your opponent has a poison counter, you get to give them an additional +1. You get to give them additional poison, maybe unlocking the corrupted ability of maybe some cards you have with corrupted on it. Definitely kind of interesting overall. And proliferate's kind of one of those interesting mechanics I do think works very well with a lot of cards, as I do think there are quite a few cards in just not in, Phyrexia All-in-One, but in other sets that also, maybe want additional +1/+1 counters, and having ways to kind of, accelerate maybe their growth of that said creature. This is kind of a good mechanic that kind of goes all with that. And the last kind of ability that's just being added onto other cards you already have is going to be Completed. If you haven't seen on cards like a Johnny, Completed it replaces one of the mana costs in that particular card with a Phyrexia mana, meaning that you can pay 2 life or pay the mana color of that card. Vraska, for example, is a 6 mana Planeswalker or 5 mana plus pay 2 life for the Phyrexia mana, and you get it out a little bit earlier. She doesn't have actually any plus Planeswalker ability. Her 0 is actually the only way you're going to be able to put counters on her that allow you to draw a card, lose a life. But it's definitely kind of one of those interesting mechanics that kind of goes along with the lore of the story. This whole time, these other Planeswalkers that have been completed have been secretly Phyrexian agents. This is the set where all the Phyrexian agents have now come to life, essentially, or put themselves into the forefront of the story. I think Jace is another Planeswalker that is secretly Phyrexian agent. I also think that Nihili is another one, and I think there's a couple more that I can't think off the top of my head that they're going to be introduced with Phyrexia All-in-One and become these other completed Planeswalkers, which is definitely going to be kind of interesting overall. I do think this set is going to be quite interesting when it comes to mechanics, as I do think some of them, as they do sound kind of like lame in name maybe, I do think they're quite interesting mechanics. I like Toxic. I think Toxic's going to be cool. For Mirrodin is going to be kind of one of those interesting things, as it's kind of be, a mechanic that is going to give some added benefit to equipments from this set, but it unfortunately doesn't really add anything to other equipments from other sets. But with that being said, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Is there any mechanic that really stands out to you as being something that you want to mess around with? I'm going to say it's more than likely most people like to mess around with poison out of all of this. And outside of that, if you like the video, hit that like button. Definitely helps out a lot. If you're new here, you want to post new videos like this one here on the channel, hit that subscribe button. But until next time, I'll see you in the next video.